Welcome to the Counterweight podcast. I am Doug Rogers, Chief Revenue Officer and Managing Partner for Waypoint Healthcare Solutions. And I'm joined weekly by my co-host, James Canary, founder and owner of the Upper Right Corner. Together, we are focused on speaking to and learning from growth leaders across the healthcare space about their journeys and lessons learned. James and I want to explore how growth leaders manage this tension, not only for their teams, but also with their leaders and in many cases, board members and investors. We will discuss with our guests the career journey they have been on, key influences that help them put them into the position they are today. We will talk about successes and challenges, what they learned from these events for themselves and for their teams. Join us each week for a new episode with our guest. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn under the name The Counterweight Podcast. Subscribe, like, follow, and give us feedback as we go along. Now on to the show. All right, excited to be here, The Counterweight Podcast. I'm joined by my co-host, James Canary, and am over the moon. We've got Nick Helfrich here with us on the pod of many, many fames. We're going to hear a lot about his journey, about his experiences. But I have to say before we dive into this, and we didn't even talk about this beforehand, Nick, I still go back and read your post on LinkedIn when you gave a shout out to the Cerner training program and to everyone who came out of that. And I just want to say one, kudos. And more than anything, I thought it was a really, really impressive thing to shout out and lift up everybody who came through and highlight the things that they've done. So I still read it. I reread it before we did this. It was a great post. A lot of other really good posts, but I would be remiss if I did not call that out because it was really, really cool. And thank you for doing that. So Nick, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing these days, where you are, and then we've got a lot of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Full circle moment for me. I got into sales because of James, and I'm sure we'll click into that down the road. About 15 years ago now.
So sorry. It's all my fault.
You could have led me down worse experiences.
This is what you get. You get on a podcast now. So now you get to vent. This is therapy now for you, Nick. Welcome.
It could have been a lot worse. But I've been in sales for the last 15 years. I'm sitting in as the Chief Growth Officer of Certify right now. Focus on business data intelligence or provider data intelligence in the health plan space more than anything. We'll be entering the health system market in 2025. For the last 15 years, I've been purely focused on healthcare technology. I've been really fortunate to be the first salesperson or an early salesperson within either a developing team, a new company, or a new business unit within the company. And that's been a really fun journey for me. It's opened up a lot of opportunity for early career growth. And it's helped me learn a significant amount from a lot of different people over the last 15 years. Today at Certify, I manage what we consider the entire client experience. And we framed that up from what is our brand messaging all the way through sales and client success.
Wow.
So I have the opportunity and the pleasure to work with our marketing team, our manager marketing team, business development, implementation, and client success organization. And they all have unique needs. They all experience a totally different part of that client journey. But it's been pretty fantastic to learn from a lot of different individuals with a ton of different experiences.
So you mentioned that part of the way you got into sales was James, and I think there's no better way to dive in than let's talk about what that story is. But as we go through, I think it'd be really fascinating to hear your perspective on what it is now as a leader versus when you started as an individual contributor and some of the things that you've taken away from that journey, especially as you look back down to your team that, hey, I really like to see these attributes or these capabilities in team members when I bring them on board. But tell us a little bit. So how did you get started? And is it really because of James that you got into sales?
It was a serendipitous moment. So
Ooh.
James used to be our advisor for my old college fraternity. So I got to meet him. I got to meet Eric Grimm, a couple of other individuals that live in this Cerner ecosystem. And in my eyes, had and were having an extremely high degree of success. Were gentlemen to their core, just all around good people. And a lot of that reflected for me. And I'm not just tooting James's horn because he's here. I really saw that and I really believed in it. I also was coming out of college and I saw sales as this opportunity to advance based on my own merit. I saw sales as this unique opportunity as I can put as much as I want into that, and it's going to be very black and white if I'm successful or not. You're going to be good at it, you're going to be bad at it, and I was completely fine taking that risk. I did not want to get into, a big four accounting firm or a consulting firm where you went in these 2-3 year cycles and you hope to get your promotion and you matriculated forward. I wanted to be somewhere where I thought I could really lean in, attack it, be a student of whatever space we were in at that time. Uh, and hopefully grow my own success. I volunteered at a children's hospital going back to St. Louis into my high school days. So healthcare was something I was really familiar with, and it's hard to live in Kansas City without hearing of Cerner, now Oracle. This was a really strong fit, and it drew me in really fast. So kind of, I joke, I begged, borrowed, cheated, and stealed, and asked James to do the same thing and put my name out there and his name behind it in order to get into the training program that you mentioned early on. And I feel really fortunate to have had that opportunity, and it's been a good launch pad to say the least.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's been fun
James.
it's been really fun to watch Nick grow in his career, in his life, with a family now. So really, really fun from my perspective. So I want to unpack, you went into the training program, you jumped into kind of the individual contributor role. What were some of the milestones in your career, in your journey to get you to where you are right now? Maybe just kind of lay some of those out for us.
Yeah, there's a couple of moments that stick out. Whenever I was in that training program, there is some jockeying to get into your next position.
Almost like a competition.
A little bit of a competition. And I will tell you guys right now, I was not first in my class. I wasn't last, but I definitely wasn't top 50%. There's some jockeying.
I thought if you're not first, you're last.
We'll take it then.
Sorry. Anyway, keep going.
But there was another leader at Cerner who I thought had a similar experience to me is Michael Farrell, leading at the time the Community Works organization. He had also, I believe, started his sales career at a young age, set a lot of early records, very hungry, and I could see his own kind of career growth. So I wanted to be on that organization, and I remember telling him, hey, there's a territory nobody's covered for 2 years. I'll take that territory. I'll take the chance. That was the Northeast, very tough territory. Had the opportunity to open that up. But I remember, as we think about like kind of those launching moments early in the career, I still remember and sometimes think about the very first Cerner Awards ceremony I went to. And, they were huge experiences. The whole sales organization is there, from the client support side, all the supporting orgs, the new business development side. And I remember being back there and, didn't deserve, should not have gotten, but I remember seeing everybody get their awards. And I remember being happy for them, of course. But I remember just looking at myself and being like, this can't happen again, where you're just sitting in the back of the room and nothing's happening. I was borderline mad. I left early that night and just got to work and had the opportunity, I think, to work with a lot of health systems in a strategic kind of consultative manner to build momentum early in that moment. Earlier I talked about like the meritocracy of sales. I think hitting my number after not hitting my number that year for a couple of years in a row positioned me to move into sales leadership when the seats opened up. I think that combination of opportunity and hard work led to the right things. And if those first 4 or 5 years hadn't gone the way they did, where I was able to hit my number, where there happened to be sales leadership positions opening up, like this combination of luck and hard work, I think all of that allowed me to kind of accelerate my career and take some of the steps I did in the future to kind of be where I was. But I think a lot about those early individual contributor roles and or years really, and putting in the hours to close new business, knowing that if the numbers were there, somebody would knock on the door and say the next opportunity is available. And at the time, Cerner was growing so much, doors were not only opening up, they were being created.
Oh
So I
yeah,
wanted to be there when a
yeah,
door got created.
that's a really good statement. Uh, I'd be curious, Nick. So clearly, you've had success at Cerner, and then as you moved into other positions, and including to where you are now. But as you think about that starting point when you were an
Yes.
individual contributor, um, what were the things either that you saw other people doing, and then you incorporated into your activities, or that you just did yourself or you learned in the training program, but how did you materialize? What were the mechanical
Yeah.
things that you did that put you in a position of success?
Yeah, I looked at the other individuals that have been successful in that role. And when I looked at them, I think three things stood out, either as their own strength or a combination of all of those, or various, conglomerates of these. One was people who are really good were students of healthcare. They don't work. They could have a conversation with any of the executives within these hospitals they were going into and not look silly. So they're students of their industry. They knew how to work the Cerner machine
Mm.
or whatever company you're at. How does the machine work? How do you get pricing? How do you get a contract? How do you book a demo? Are you responsible for that? There were students how that worked. And then they knew their territory. They were in their territory on a regular basis. They knew who their clients were. They knew what was important to their clients, how they were in the news, what the metrics were that moved the meter for them. And I think that combination of knowing your clients, your company, and your industry could put you in a position to be successful. I tried to lean into that. So when I was in the Northeast, I had, I think at the time, 420 hospitals. So I looked at those 420
Wow.
hospitals as like, where are the hospitals that are actually going to buy? If they signed a new contract in the last year, that wasn't going to happen. And once we kind of started opening doors and understood our territory more, it was time to work the machine and to some degree be taught the machine too, in order to move those deals from start to finish, from cold call through contracting and watching implementation.
So Nick, we know that being an individual, strong individual contributor doesn't always equate to being
Mm.
a good manager and leader. You've obviously been able to translate your skills into management and leadership. When did that happen? How did that happen? Was that always a goal for you? And at what point did you sort of say, "Hey, yeah, I think I can do this"?
Yeah. We should probably ask some of the people I managed really early on if I was good at it. See what they say. It's going back to like getting into sales. I got into sales because I knew the meritocracy would open up leadership kind of type positions. I actually thought they'd open up leadership positions potentially in like operations or running a business unit, but you kind of get addicted to the sales side. And when I moved into sales leadership, I realized that it became really clear to me that sales sits at this like interesting intersection of implementation, legal, you get operations, you get to work within all these different business units. And that's what that realization made me want to lean into the experience. So I focused a lot on who do I want to be as a leader? How do
Mm.
I want to be known? How do I want my people to think about their experience with me? Um, I think it was Maya and check this. We'll check this later. But she said people are going to remember how you feel, how you made them feel. And I wanted people to remember how I made them feel in a really positive way. So for me personally, I have kind of defined my leadership methodology as I lean really heavily into servant leadership. Just how can I serve you? How can I make you better? I think your success will show my success over time. And then I really focus on the basics. I think the basics are critical, especially for individual contributors. If you can do the basics really well, all the other pieces fall into place. And even when I get new people on my team today, I try to teach them the basics of this is how we price, this is why we price. And I think if you have really talented people and you recruit those really talented people and you serve them and you teach them the basics, they're going to do really, really incredible work. And I've seen that over and over again.
So we've got a team of researchers that will do proper quote attribution
Oh, it's
after the
actually
fact.
it's pretty easy because it's right back there on my wall.
That's
Is it on your wall?
oh
That's great.
It is Maya Angelou, and I'll read it. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. So there you
Good,
go.
right? So
Good
no one
job.
will remember
that
what we talk about, but hopefully they remember they enjoyed watching it, guys.
well and look, you used the word serendipity earlier. You didn't realize that that was going to be the theme for
The
this
whole time.
entire that's right, this entire conversation. You know,
Yeah.
I actually want to go back because you made a comment about your journey into sales, and
Yeah.
to some degree it was a little bit of a throwaway comment, but I actually think it was a really really important and big step. You raised your hand and said, hey, I want to go tackle the hardest of the hard. Now, that may be a bit of a stretch, but you essentially said, hey, I know this is what I want to go do, and to go prove myself, I want to go tackle this territory that is difficult to engage, may not have been performing with prior people in the way that we would expect, etc. um, what what empowered you to have the grit to raise your hand and say, instead of someone coming to you, say, hey, we're going to put you there, for you to say, hey, I will jump off this cliff head first and see what happens? Is there something in your life story that just gave you that impetus, if you will?
Besides blind stupidity,
you know,
I, as you were talking through that, Doug, I was kind of thinking about it, and I think a lot of young men can look up to their fathers and think about
mm,
some of those experiences. One thing my dad told all of his sons very regularly, I remember every time we got out of the car, he'd say, remember the golden rule and be a gentleman. And he'd also say, if you don't ask, you're never going to know. And the worst that can
wow.
happen is they can say no. And I say that to my own 5-year-old son right now still. And it's been true. If you don't ask, even in, from big, big, hairy questions like, will you marry me to your spouse, to asking to that territory, even in the actual sales process, I've got an excellent sales executive on my team, Matt Durfeld, and he's exceptional at asking those hard questions that you
Mm,
might not want to ask, but like in your gut, you're like, oh God, I gotta know the answer to this. I don't know the answer. And I think asking that and being like willing to kind of ask that, you get more comfortable with it over time. And I think hearing that from my dad for decades, if I see him this weekend, he'll probably say the same thing. Uh, Made it me very comfortable in that moment to ask for it.
That's really good. As you think about your evolution as a sales leader,
Yeah.
what are some of the, maybe pick one of the challenges that you've faced, and how did you overcome that challenge? How did you deal with it?
I don't know. I still overcoming it even.
Yeah.
I feel
mm,
really fortunate. So one of the things Certify and General Catalyst, our primary customers, given us as executive coaches, like he
mm,
asks to them, especially as sitting in the C-suite for the first time, I know I have blind spots, plenty of them. I have the opportunity to talk to a third-party coach about those blind spots and grow those skills. The one, the one we come back to a lot, and I think about a lot, is flying at the right elevation. And in leadership, especially if you're a strong individual contributor, and I would venture to say like a lot of individual contributors struggle with this when they move into leadership, is it's easy to like get into the work and do the work and want to do that. But as you scale a team, as your goals get bigger, as you have more teams and more markets, you've got to fly at a higher elevation and trust the people underneath you that they're flying at the right elevation. And I think you've got to have the flexibility to go down or up as you need to. But I still catch myself flying at a much lower elevation. And to some degree, I can get more tactful in those moments when I need to step back and get strategic and say, okay, hey, like spending 15 hours this week on that deal or that client might not get us to our long-term objectives. And I got to trust my rep, my client success executive, whoever it is, to manage that because we taught them, we leaned in with servant leadership. And I got to go back up here to start thinking about the 2025 goals or scaling the implementation team or whatever that next bigger project is 2 miles down the road instead of what's in the windshield. So I talked to my coach, Amanda Breckenridge. She's fantastic. I talked to her a ton about flying at the right elevation and making sure that we're managing these seasons of our career the right way. And, a season could be a week long, it could be a year long, it could be a decade long, probably. You just got to think about how to manage it the right way.
Just to take that a step further, if let's say you are zooming in to the details and maybe flying too low of an elevation, how do you have that conversation with your team? Like, do you calibrate that? Do you back off from it? Do they say something to you? I mean, how do you calibrate the right level of involvement and detail orientation?
Um, I don't know that I do it that well all the time. I think it's a combination of having like strong communication skills, and one of like the basic things I do is I block my calendar for strategic work. It's, hey, I've got 2 hours blocked to focus on a market analysis for health systems to see if that makes sense. Don't book meetings during that. You can book around it. I'll support you at a different time, but I need this. I got to protect my own calendar in order to focus on those strategic kind of initiatives. I had a moment with an individual on my team, and I was like, "Hey, can I join that client meeting?" And she's like, "You can join whatever client meeting you want. I'm not going to tell you no." And it was kind of a joke at the time, but I think about it, it's like a lot of times your team members aren't going to tell you no, so you've got to think about, are you spending your time the right way? If you've only got so many shifts, beans, whatever in a day, are you allocating them in the right buckets? I think for me, that takes a lot of discipline at times.
I one of the things I take away from what you just said is this attitude of intentionality. And I go back to the observation of how you got started, which is, hey, raising your hand and saying, I want to take this, whether it was intentional or whether it was just the power of youth and I'm going to go do this, what have you. Regardless, as you move forward in your career, what I'm sensing, what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing is that you have seen that being intentional with your time and your efforts is what distinguishes that elevation where you may be. Is that a fair perspective?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it's the intentionality, and I think a lot about what are the inputs you're putting in, because a lot of the sales is, and this is something I think a lot of salespeople realize early on, is in our bid, like in what we do and the work we do, whether you're on the client support side or the business development side or somewhere in between, sales is one of those interesting careers where you can put inputs in all day
Mm-hmm.
and you might not get the output you want. And you're definitely not going to get the output you want on the exact time you want it. It's going to happen at a different pace usually. So I think that intentionality to set aside time to put in the inputs, to put in the work, but also come back and say, okay, I did 100 emails and I only got a 2% reply rate. What's wrong with that email? Because the input's not good enough to even earn the outputs. And that's like a very basic example, but I think if you're thinking about those things and constantly trying to iterate, especially in this environment, you have to, you can drive some success in your career, in your year, as you chase that target, that opportunity, whatever it is.
Yeah. So to that point, and you were talking about carving out time for strategy. So when you're making strategic decisions, how do you handle the risk and uncertainty? Right? There's no certainty in this world. Right? There's all kinds of risks,
Yeah.
market risks, client behavior, people. Right? If it wasn't for people, this job would be easy. Right? Um, so
Yeah.
how do you kind of make decisions as to where you're going to invest the team or where you're going to focus your team's time and energy or your time and energy? How do you handle that risk and uncertainty?
Yeah. I try to always go back to the data, whether that's from our Salesforce information, whether
Mhm.
that's industry TAM analyses or competitive analyses. I always try to go back to that, and I bring that data in and I write a lot. I block aside a lot of time to write memos, to write emails, but I think focusing in, if you have a strategic goal, so right now I'm going on paternity leave on August 31st. I'm leaving.
Congratulations.
I'm really
Wow.
excited. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I didn't say it during my intro, but I'm a simple Midwest guy with a wife, two kids, and a third on the way. So I try to live a simple life, but I'm leaving. We're still going to have a 2025 plan, and I'm taking 3 months of time off. So I need to know now how we're
Hmm.
going to hit our 2025 targets so we can start planning. So I immediately started looking at our data. Where are we going to end from a revenue perspective? If our goal's 2x, 3x growth, what do we need to get there? And I started mirroring out, in this instance, scenarios. So if we have the ability to sell in this market and we have this many new products and we're willing to spend X budget to get six new heads because we know every new BD executive can bring in on average $3 million. It's that data and that information that I can bring into a story. And then I share it with my peers and my team members so they can provide feedback and find the blind spots within that data story that we've created so that we can really attack it. And at the end of the day, we can make like very educated guesses, but I think if we're looking at the information we have available to us, we think all this is valid or get feedback in other spaces that, hey, like actually like this isn't going to be the TAM. There's a better article from McKinsey or Bessemer or someone else. We can adjust it and say, okay, we all agree to this. We're going to invest 10 million so we can hit a goal of 50 million based on these steps and these actions. There's uncertainty, but if you take the actions and you work at it, it puts you in a better position. It's never a guarantee in sales, though.
It's definitely never a guarantee. I I want to take a bit of a juxtaposition here because and I was really fascinated by what you described there, Nick, the process you're going through, the analysis to then set the 2025 plan. But if we think about where you got your start, Cerner
Yeah,
Corporation, large company, had a relatively known brand, that sales motion as an individual contributor, I suspect is different than what your individual contributor sales team members do today at Certify.
hmm,
Now, I've heard
yeah,
great things about Certify. I've got a great product. You're killing it out there. But the reality, right, Certify is a different dynamic than what Cerner would have been from a sales cycle standpoint.
yeah,
What is the differences in the sales process, and what do you see that needs to be done in your sales team versus perhaps what you did as an individual contributor when you
yeah,
were in Big Co, etc.
yeah. It's funny you say big co because I do think Cerner helped open doors. Like it helped us
Yeah.
fill pipeline. One thing that I don't know if I learned it or just expected it and it became the normal at Cerner was you're going to live on a 90-day cycle. There were
Mm.
numbers you had to get to, and you were going to do everything you could to get to those numbers. Um, that led to a lot of compelling events, from industry compelling events like meaningful use to losing implementation slots to budget flexibility. I think there are a lot of those pieces. And I think having that sense of urgency internally and even externally and figuring out what our client's pain point was, what are you working towards, what's your date, what matters to you. I think that is something I learned from that Cerner experience that I've taken into the other stops in my career to the
Hmm.
point where I could probably pull up five different what I call buyer's journeys. And it's a combination of like the Miller Hyman complex sales process and like a medic pedic type model to say from sales funnel to contract close, what's my probability of signing clients along that
Hmm.
stage? And what steps are going to happen? And what does the client want at those different points? And we've actually, at my last couple of stops, developed both an internal and an external buyer's journey. So we know what we have to do internally, and then externally, We work on it. We present it in a consultative manner, especially if you're in this large enterprise sales process.
Yeah.
How do you stand out? You're not just going to show up, throw up, and sign a contract. You're going to guide someone through an extremely complex decision. And we ask our buyers, do you agree? And are there other steps that you know you have to get through? Are you going to have to go through your budgeting process? What's that look like? What's your security review process look like? Is your contracting process 3 months? Is it 3 days? What are the documents you use? And I think getting that mutual agreement and then aligning that timeline to their goals and what they want to achieve is not the best, but it's been a strong recipe for success for me at a couple of different spots. So it's having a process internally and externally. So driving back to the basics. What are the basics you have to do? And how do you find the pain or the problem that the client wants to solve? And I think if you surround yourself with really like excellent salespeople or client success executives and you've defined the basics and the process for them, they'll take that and create their own art and they'll add their own personality to it. Because the way I close a deal or manage a relationship is going to be way different than the way Doug does or the way James does. And that's true for everybody on your team, probably. Their skill sets are all different and you need to play to them, but tell them what game they're playing. What are the rules? What are the parameters?
That's what I'm hearing from you here. And I want to make sure our listeners can take away some talking points here to apply to their own world. So what I'm hearing is that, yes, have a process, but bring the client buyer in on that process.
Yeah.
And I haven't always seen that happen. There have been places where the process of the company does not match up
to what the buyer
right?
wants. Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, they don't care about your quarter. They don't care about your quota per se. I mean, they might like you and want to help you, but the reality is they're running their business. So maybe share a little bit more about how you have that dialogue with the client where you're really bringing them in on the, like, do we agree that we're going to move on this toward this, we're going to march toward this goal together? To talk a little bit more about how you do that or how you coach your teams to do that.
Yeah. This is where I would say the art of sales and the science of sales kind of starts to meet. Like, hey, we have a repeatable process. We know it works. Like, we know if we do these 6 things with a client, the likelihood of closing goes up significantly. But the way you deliver that to a client and when you deliver it to a client have a really big impact on how it's received. For us at Certify, where we're at now, we know that clients are excited about the opportunity of our product, our offering. At some point after that pricing's been delivered and they're starting to, because in fact, from a demonstration perspective, a lot of people understand the fit. And this moment's going to happen for different companies at different points. And when you know you've got that momentum and you know you've got a champion, that's the point where you can come to them and say, hey, this is how I can help you. And I'm working for you. I'm not working for Certify. I need to get you all these things and I can help you along this. Are there other things you're going to need or other stories you're going to have to tell to different people? In that moment, it's going to be different for everybody. Different for everybody that joins this podcast or any podcast, but kind of starting to get an understanding of when you have buy-in, when do you have strong relationships, strong goodwill, is that moment when I think you can come in and say, hey, this is how I think I can help you get this done.
Yeah. And you've earned the right to ask. You've earned the right. It's not even really asking. You've earned the right to have that dialogue.
Yep. Absolutely.
Right? Because you've built the relational capital. And I think maybe where I see folks shy away from that maybe a little bit because they're afraid of the answer or they're afraid to be salesy.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you found a way to bring the client along at the right point. I think timing is everything, right? If you ask that question too early, it's a little bit like asking, what do we want our wedding cake to be like on your first date? It's going to be a little bit awkward.
That works 1 out of 10 times. One
Although
on
I
one.
would not have been surprised if Nick did that with his wife,
Yeah.
just kind of doing the like assumptive close, like, yeah, I am going to marry you. We're
Yeah.
going to talk about wedding cake on our first
No,
date.
that gets
And he,
back to
and he
begging,
basically
borrowing.
willed it into happening. I wouldn't be surprised.
Nick, I imagine that part of that communication process is framed in the objective that the client is trying to solve for, and less
Yeah,
so you have a 90-day cycle or 180 day cycle, etc. I also feel that conversation is reminiscent of what you talked about earlier, which is being able to ask the hard questions that you know in your gut you should ask, but you're
yeah,
scared to ask sometimes. How do you train that with your sales team? Because I imagine, right? You mentioned you've got a great seller that does that somewhat
yeah,
innately, but we have all had sellers. We've all been sellers in different
yeah,
degrees of skill and innate capabilities. How do you train that, instill that, coach that in your team today?
yeah. Feedback and practice.
Mm,
We have feedback forward culture. Um, and I think when you have a safe culture where everyone knows that you're working towards the same objective, that feedback gets really, really easy. And people know that you are driving the best results. And that's opportunities for improvement as well as where you're doing really well. So I practice that feedback a lot. We also leverage some tools where I can listen back on calls and say, hey, here's where you should have asked that question, or here's when you can ask that question, to the point where I can even sit in on current calls and not be on them. So my
mm,
salesperson is still earning the trust of their potential coach or champion, and they don't see me because naturally people are going to tend to go to the highest available title. If there's a VP on the call, they're going to want to talk to the VP. If there's a growth officer, they're going to want to talk to the growth officer. So I don't have to be on those calls, but I can listen to it and, with Slack or text message, say, hey, like now would be a really good time for this question, and get that practice in. And I can see my team members getting more and more um, comfortable in those situations. And then they see the value too, because now they know the answers. And I think knowing the answers lets you kind of define your sales process, which is a big unknown thing in a really meaningful way. So I think that's definitely helped. Feedback and practice. Practice
yeah.
helps a ton.
I, I will say the tools have come so far. I had a similar tool when we were at Cerner, which was James sharing the office with me and yelling at me while I was on call, say this, do this.
What are you
Hang on,
doing?
I was doing like Morse. I was doing Morse code
that's,
on the wall. So
that's right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it kind of worked.
I
Yeah, I mean,
cruise.
in a world of AI, right? We've got great technology. There's feedback. There's sentiment. There's and I think there's also, and I just came from a conference where a lot of the focus was on AI, as you can imagine. And one of the things that one of my business partners ended up talking about was resilience, and how do you build resilience in a zero failure industry, right? So
Yeah.
healthcare needs to be a zero failure industry. We are often expected to have very little failure. We're expected to deliver on the numbers on our side of the fence. How do how do you allow for some level of failure in the sense of learning, right?
Yeah.
Without struggle, there's no growth.
Yeah.
Those things cannot coexist. Growth and comfort cannot coexist. So it sounds like to me you're providing some level of coaching, but you're not like in their face, and you're not seen by the client as, oh well, Nick's higher ranking, so I'm going to go to him, right?
Yeah.
You're enabling them some space to learn and fail on their own. Is
Yeah.
that fair?
Yeah. I mean, and I think salespeople here know in their career, day to day existence more than most, to say the least, whether that's clients, internally, whatever it is. Like you're always kind of pushing the envelope to hit those goals. The ultimate loss was losing a deal.
Hmm.
So I think we all, I lose deals. Like I think a strong win rate is 60%. If you've got a 60% win rate and you're filling pipeline in a meaningful way, especially in a competitive market where you're not defining a net new market, you could be really successful. But you get to learn from the 40, 50% that you lost. So you've got to sit down in a safe environment and say, let's do a root cause analysis. Where did we lose and why? Did we lose because we didn't have executive presence? Did they not believe in our return on investment? And I think if we do that, the sales individual learns, the whole team learns, and you build content to support that journey and you iterate on that buyer's journey to get better and improve your win rate over time. And you've got to be able to do that. We've even started, and I think a lot of people are doing this, we ask for exit interviews on every deal we lost to hear from the client. Why didn't you? Like, why not us? Right. And that gives us good learnings as well. And it's a team sport. I tell everyone on my team early and often, you can win by yourself. That's great. I would love if you won by yourself. If you lose by yourself, though, we're going to have problems. Like, this is a team sport. Bring me in, bring your coach in, bring the other team members in. You don't want to lose alone, and you don't want a loss to be a surprise to the whole board. Because if we're playing as a team and we lose, I lost that deal just as much as you. So I'm a part of this with you. So we believe a lot in that team sport. And like I've said, if my team listens to this, they know you can win by yourself, but you cannot lose by yourself.
That's a good word, man.
That is a good word.
Let's talk about growth, which is another form of winning. Now at a leadership level, you're in the C-suite, you're presenting to the board, or you're connected often to the board, to the financial backers, the partners, whether private equity, venture, public, whatever. We're in a world where there are often high expectations for growth. How do you deal with when there's a high expectation for growth and it maybe doesn't match up to reality?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Especially with board members and the CEO. Carefully, right? First, carefully.
Good,
tactfully and carefully.
You mean it's not show up and throw up? It's not
not this time.
No.
I really feel fortunate, because I'm like right in my windshield. I have this 2025 exercise. What's our revenue going to be in 2025? And I don't think everybody gets this opportunity, but I got to go to my CEO and say, hey, where do we think our target is? Do we think it's X, Y? Is it 2X, 3X, 20X? And, we both reached this agreement of saying, let's map out scenarios, because it can't be 100 million and you get no new resources or you stay within your own team. And I feel very fortunate that my leader understands that. Not every leader may understand that, or the target might just be it's 2X every single year, no matter what. And then I think you have to have that dialogue, and you got to get comfortable having the conversation of, okay, it's 2X, but do we have any new products? Do we have a new market?
Tapped out your total addressable market.
Yeah. And you might be fortunate too, in that the total addressable market, 2X is fine. 2X is easy. You've got the right team and you just got to do the same thing over again. But you also might be looking at the numbers and going, how is this going to happen? And I think being honest about that and beating that drum a little bit to say, hey, I can hit 3X, but I need 2 new salespeople in this market, or we need to open up health systems, and we've been doing health plans.
So what I'm hearing is it's not a binary thing where it's like, yes, we'll hit this, or no, we won't. It's you're laying out the scenarios of if this, then this, and it's a give and take.
Yep.
Right? You're having a dialogue rather than a binary, sort of like yes or no conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And if we go back and we look at the data, then we're saying, hey, here's the scenarios, and here's the if this, then that, and this is why that math works out. It puts you in a position with your leadership team, with your own salespeople, because at the end of the day, you're going to get a number from the board, the private equity firm, your CEO, and you've got to make your team believe it. And they've got to understand that you can reach it. And sometimes just the simple napkin math of, hey, our goal is this. And if we do these things, we're going to hit this goal. Like, we got this. All we have to do is these 3 things and the right things will happen, or these deals within our pipeline close. And it's telling that story through data.
Well, and I want to key in on that because you've made that reference several times, which is the data tells the story. You talked about it in terms of the sales process and when to have the conversation, how deals are moving through the funnel, what are the activities that are happening, and then you just talked about it in the same way, but more so how you have the conversation up. In your journey, how did you learn those things? How did you learn the aspects of what data is important, how to make that a daily practice, et cetera? And I ask that because as an individual contributor, you use a lot of the data, but you're not the one saying, hey, here's the framework I need. You're putting it in, you're executing the plan. But as you go into leadership and as you and grow, it's a very different perspective in terms of, hey, I need all of this information because I've got to start figuring out what levers to pull. So how did you learn that throughout your journey?
As an individual contributor, it was my personal experience of I have to track all this. I have to manage my own, and I tell the individuals I get to work with today, you get to kind of manage your own P&L. Like, you get your own territory and you've got to drive $5 million in revenue, whatever it is. And you get to manage that however you want, but you got to do it really well. And for me personally, back when I was an individual contributor, it was a lot of one of the windows I had open every single day, or 2 of the windows I had open every single day was back in the day, an Excel sheet with all my clients. And I had them red, yellow, green. And I would look every day on like, okay, how do I get more greens than yellows and reds? And get engaged with these different groups. As Cerner, as other companies kind of matured, added more CRM sophistication, I personally just attached to it very easily because I could see it move through. And in fact, everywhere I go, I build a Salesforce Kanban where you can see it move right through the funnel. And I kind of have always asked myself with my own territory or my team's territories, how do we move this deal further along the process? And that has led to the habit of keeping Salesforce updated, keeping your CRM updated, which isn't that exciting, but you get a lot of information out of it. And I don't want to be, and I think the people around me would say, like, I'm not like, well, if it's not in Salesforce, it doesn't exist. But if it's not in Salesforce, I can't think through it, especially if I'm not close to that deal when you're flying at that higher elevation. So I think out of habit and just wanting to know where all these deals are, there hasn't been like a seminal moment or a seminal training or it's like you got to focus on the data. For me, it's just been, if I'm not looking at these things, how am I supposed to actually move the meter forward? Actually, you know what else it was? Oh man,
We've got props.
yeah, I thought my bookshelf's there. I can't find it. You guys have probably read this book. Hope is Not a Strategy.
Yes. Yeah.
Only like 95 pages. Every time I start a new job, I read it. I read it a lot. And mine is so marked up. It's not. You have to like look at the information. You have to think about how to drive it forward. I think I've gifted many of my teams that exact book because it's such an easy read. And I think like taking those inputs and looking at the value you get from those inputs, Doug, has what's helped me. So a long answer to say it's just been habit my whole career. And, I haven't had that like one moment of this is why I have to dive into the data all the time.
No, that makes sense. And habits, right? Habits are key to reinforcing good and bad behavior. And as you mentioned, you've built this habit, and clearly you're training your teams on how to use similar habits to put them in a position of success. You have had a lot of success. You're Chief Growth Officer for Certify. You've had a number of individual contributor roles, leadership roles. I suspect, Nick, not everything has been hunky dory. However, what is something where you stumbled, and what did you take from that, and how hopefully, did it make you better in the role as a leader or as an individual contributor?
Yeah. Stumble daily, like fail daily, and try to learn from those things. If I think about some of the big moments, I talked about asking for that territory, asking for the
Mm-hmm.
Northeast. I do think, and I have no problem admitting it, I think I was kind of stumbling there a little bit. Like it was a hard territory. I was trying to figure out who I was as a salesperson, trying to build my own confidence, get comfortable in that market. The second part of that story is I was working really hard. I wasn't getting the output we wanted of the deals, but my manager at the time saw the inputs. So when another more friendly territory opened up, I was offered that territory. He said, I can tell you're working hard. I can tell that you're putting everything in. You're going to be successful here because we have reference clients. We have people you can talk to. People know who we are. Um, so I was stumbling there, but that work effort, I think, kind of opened a door when the door opened up. And I was kind of tapped on the shoulder and I said, yeah, I would love to do that. And then I got to go into Kansas and Missouri, which for a Kansas City company, Cerner, it is a great territory to have. Uh, Note to everybody, have the territory where your headquarters are. You'll probably do pretty well. Uh,
It
I
is
was
pretty helpful.
stumbling there for sure. Um, and I still think I struggle with my management style is not perfect for everybody. And I think I meet new people, new individuals that have their own styles where I'm learning how do we coexist in a way that you're successful and I'm successful. And I've had those moments over the last, 10 years of, okay, like in fact, at Certify, there's an individual I was working with coexisting within our team. And we're like 2 weeks into this. And I'm like, hey, why am I not hearing from you? And
Mm.
we talked about it. And for us in that instance, it was a couple of things, but one of the really simple things was like, I wake up early, I work early, I kind of do your traditional off at 5. Yes, there's some night works. And this individual in a different role outside of sales was like, hey, I start my day at like 10. I work until 5. I take a 2-hour break and then I work another 6 hours. Like I just am on a different cadence. And once I learned that, it helped. But to me, my biggest fumbles, I think about early at Cerner and I think about just how can I make the people around me successful and understanding that even though my style is what it is, they might need something else or they might need to, listen to a different song in order to drive the right results.
Yeah,
And
no,
that
that
does
makes
not always
sense.
happen right away.
It takes time. It takes time. And communication, I think, like you said, is a big part of that. Um, Also, I think realizing that our recognition that there are things that put you in a position of success, even though they may not be showing immediate outcomes of success. Like sometimes you just have
Yeah.
to keep working through the pain to get to the output or get to the other side, and that's a super hard thing to do without a doubt.
Yeah.
Mm. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm curious, so as you sit in the role today, you probably have had a chance to hire any number of people in prior roles, in this role, et cetera. What do you look for? What do you look for in attributes? Not per se a
Yeah.
resume. I've been on record. I think resumes are the worst thing in the world. They're a facade. They don't tell you the story of anything. They paint a very different picture intentionally of the person you're going to talk to, and it makes it more difficult to actually get to the kernels of truth. So that's my resume rant, if you will.
Yeah.
But what are the things that you try to pull out to understand, hey, this individual, he, she is going to have the best potential for success on our
Yeah.
respective team?
Yeah. So an exercise our executive leadership team did a while ago was we were all sitting at dinner and we said, everyone get your phones out, which is rare. Like you're at dinner, get your phones out
Yeah.
instead of put them away. And we said, on the count of 3, we're all going to text each other the one word that we think is most important when hiring. And there's 6 of us sitting around the table, different organizations, different experiences. And of the 6 of us, 5 of us, well, 4 of us texted the exact same word. and one of us was very close, and we said 3, 2, 1, and the text that came through the most was the word grit.
I was just going to say that.
We should have done it. We should have done it as a quick exercise here. I think it's really hard to measure. I think grit's really hard to measure an interview for. Um, but especially in sales, especially in startups, it is tough. It is not easy. You move really fast. Your goals change, your focus changes, your priorities change. In sales, again, you're getting told no, you're learning new things, you're innovating. Like you might have a product where you know that feature's not there and you got to wait 3 months before it is. But how do you sell around that problem? And that grit, it's really hard to measure for. So I do catch myself going back to a lot of, known commodities, who are people I've worked with, or who within my network has worked with people and can vouch for them or provide a reference before the reference request. How do you get a reference like to actually get them into the interview? I think that's really important. But grit is really the one that stands out for me, and the people that are willing to work hard and can learn and are open to that is really important. The other thing I do during my interviews, my first interview, especially for the last 5 years of my career with individuals, is always like I would say it's like setting the stage. Here's who I am. Here's who the company is. And let me tell you about all the skeletons in our closet before we even really get going. And if you're still interested, we'll have deeper conversations and go into that. But I have a very honest conversation with them of like, I want you to know that this is what you're walking into. And if you don't want to walk into it, like, let's not continue the conversation. So people come in eyes wide open and ready to perform. If you do have questions on like how to measure for grit, I want to know them.
I do not. Other than I think it comes down to the stories. Like you've got to get them to tell. Like if I were interviewing you, I would want to hear that story that you talked about, raising your hand, getting the hardest territory, but you didn't hit your number, and what happened next. And then,
but how many salespeople tell the story of not hitting their number?
Well, that's my other resume rant. Is I don't believe resumes when I see salespeople that say I hit my number, boom, 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 boom. There's more to that story. Some of them may be true. Some of them may be a reality of, hey, everybody in the market was going up, or what have you. But what do you learn from that? I'd rather know where did you hit a wall, and then how did you recover?
Yeah, I got asked the question once. Have you been successful? And I can't remember how I answered it. We're not going to play this out. But I remember being asked by an investor, were you successful because you were in the right place at the right time, or are you good? And I probably said something along the lines of, I'm willing to work hard and learn. And I think that combination of luck and timing and putting in the effort has led to strong results. But I mean, it gets back into resumes. Like there's some people that are just in the right place and have taken good orders and it's worked out for them. And there's some people that have worked their tails off for a company without a strong product market fit and don't have that story on the resume.
Hey, just to close out the point on grit, the conference that I was at, my business partner did a presentation on grit, was the title of it, and resiliency was the concept. So this is fresh in my mind. And one of the references he made was a book by Angela Duckworth. It's in the mid 2000s called Grit. So check that out. It's the combination of passion and perseverance for a singularly important goal, tendency to sustain interest in and effort toward very long-term goals. And it's the hallmark of high achievers in every domain. And what was really encouraging from the research is there's evidence that grit can be increased. And so the book kind of shares insights on how to increase grit. But I couldn't agree more with, particularly in this industry and what we're being tasked to do to grow, to meet the needs of the industry and to meet the needs of our customers and clients. Grit is required. It is required. And we've got to evolve. We've got to have grit to do that. Good news is humans have been doing that for thousands of years. So there's evidence that humans have adapted quite well, including to challenges, natural disasters, etc. There's a great story on IBM. There's an infographic out there, the 114-year-old startup, right? So IBM has demonstrated grit for many, many years and evolved and shown, from starting with punch cards to now AI, not making any physical hardware devices, those kind of things. So just a really cool concept. I'm really glad you brought that up.
More serendipity.
That's right. That's that is the theme of the day. Well, Nick, look, this has been a wonderful conversation. I think we've gone through a lot of really cool observations between serendipity, between grit, between challenging yourself, between communication. I mean, there's a number of things I actually wrote down that I want to just go revisit as I think about my own personal practice, that I think is really, really cool. We do have a gotcha question.
Okay.
We are going to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn it over to
You
James.
thought you were prepped.
Yeah.
Here we
go.
You know how you asked for the questions ahead of time? Well, we didn't send you this one.
I'm looking forward to it,
This is where we put you on the spot. We're going to be watching you very closely here. And because of your location and your predisposition for St. Louis, you can expand your answer here outside of the greater Kansas City area. And I'll say this. The question is the following. Big client coming in to visit, or you're hosting a client, where do you take them for barbecue?
Oh, God. That is savage. The original Oklahoma Joe's at the gas station over in Kansas. That would be the spot. I remember even being in college in Kansas City, and I had strep throat one day, and my dad was visiting because his company was based out of Kansas City. And I probably had like 100-degree fever, couldn't swallow anything. And he's like, do you want to go to Oklahoma Joe's? And I was like, I'll figure it out. And went to Oklahoma Joe's and waited in line. So Oklahoma Joe's for sure.
Awesome. Now known as Joe's Kansas City.
Yeah.
Okay.
And little known that it's so good it can cure illnesses like strep throat.
It does. There should be some case studies coming out.
This is where our lawyers would say the disclaimer is this podcast is not designed to distribute medical advice. Please do not listen to these idiots.
Yes, that's what would happen if we had lawyers.
I was going to say, you guys have lawyers?
I married a lawyer, Doug.
Same. Let's get them on the podcast. Nick, this has been fantastic. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the observations, the commentary, the journey. This has been a really, really good discussion.
Hey, thanks for having me, gentlemen. I appreciate the time. Flattered, really.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Go get 'em.
All right. Thank you for listening. We are excited to bring new episodes out each week. We are incredibly grateful to our guests and our listeners. Let us know what you think by commenting on the episodes. We are proudly sponsored by the upper right corner, which provides advice on strategic growth, including growth assessments and strategy, go-to-network planning, sales leadership and team coaching, and fractional leadership roles. For more, visit theupperrightcorner.com. Waypoint Healthcare Solutions is also proud to sponsor the Counterweight podcast. Waypoint HCS is a focused consulting organization helping health systems, providers, and organizations to develop and implement patient engagement strategies. Waypoint HCS provides strategic consulting and patient engagement technology guidance and selection. Waypoint also helps support implementation and ongoing program management. For more, visit Waypoint HCS's LinkedIn page or waypointhcs.com. Thank you to our guests and our listeners. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Subscribe, like, and follow, and we look forward to joining you again next Wednesday for another episode of The Counterweight.